Okay, rules of composition. This is from William W. I think I would start this out with kind of a laugh. I'm interested in any rule of composition to guide me to a work of art. There are things about that comment that are interesting, but I'm not a fan of rules of composition. There are what you might call underlying fundamentals. You have to be interesting. If you want somebody to be interested in looking at your work, that has to be interesting to look at. And the more interesting it is in certain ways, the more likely it is that somebody's going to like it. I'm talking about what a painting is, inevitably is what happens in this rectangle, right? Shall we say? And uh, so, interesting is not boring, right? But it also has to be unified. It has to look like it all belongs together in one place, so it's of a piece, as they say. Now, if those are rules, those are ones I hear, I listen to, and I worry, I put some time into worrying about, shall we say. But I'm otherwise not much interested in rules. I like Solomon's solecisms, things to avoid, near touching things in a frame. That there's something about that makes you uncomfortable as a viewer, and you go back and look at it, but it's got nothing to do with either the narrative and by the way, virtually everything I tell you like that, even the solecisms, they can be made into elements of interest. Curiously enough. So which rule are we going to, et cetera, et cetera. But then he says, I played with acetate overlays when I first heard about dynamic symmetry. Well, and he says it was interesting, I learned from it. Well, dynamic symmetry is in a class of things that I think of when I said, I used the expression, I think in the video he was watching, spitball me over the home plate of life. You want to find some instant success, some perfect success, and I've seen so many poor dynamic symmetry based pictures. Now you could say, well, they just didn't understand it. Not at all. In fact, I've looked at all these analyses of the Last Judgment, and I find that I can find, the golden mean or certain proportions in every painting of all times, and in bad paintings and in good paintings. I've never seen anything that convinces me that that's a reasonable thing to do. But what it does is takes you out of the game yourself. And as Gemmell said, composition is very personal. It's personal poetry. The rhyme scheme is the one you needed for the content of your poem, right? And so that's the only kind of stuff I would recommend people avoid. The road in was one when I was a kid. Oh, you have to have a road in. You have to have a road in. And then there was this thing and then that thing. Like, no. The thing about compositions is the road in is just what you see is what you get. It doesn't have to become something like a road to get you into a picture. The road in is your eye immediately goes to the more interesting spot in the picture. Now, the rule of interesting says, have a dominating spot and have sub spots, but don't have equal domination. That's a thing to avoid, right? But that's not in the class of telling you how to compose, is it? So I recommend that you think about things that might be problematical, detrimental, but don't look for formulas. That's one thing I'm trying to say. I don't recommend you look for formulas like the golden mean. I have found that there are certain kinds of placements on a page that are more interesting than others. Like right in the middle of the page is less interesting than just to the side of that a little bit. But there's nothing about thirds that I've ever seen that I would call a useful rule. I think the position of thirds is just to get out of center. And I think that's when the movies that's where that conversation comes from. Find something like thirds. But you said I learned it. Oh, I learned from it. I agree the masters probably didn't draw grids on their later paintings. I don't think they drew them on any of their paintings, but that's another story. But were they aware of dynamic symmetry or golden mean? People are just speculating. It's just like the site size. People are just speculating. Or construction drawing or anything. I don't see any evidence with any great painter that they were doing something like that. But you show me. I'll be interested. A lot of times you'll see lines on paintings, but those gridded lines are almost always for transferring the painting up to a larger board where you're going to blow it up and paint your mural on or whatever. So That's for transferring drawings. That's another story, isn't it? So was it part of the early education and awareness? I became aware of it. Being aware of something doesn't mean you have any respect for it at all, right? Yeah, you can be aware of skunks in your backyard, but yeah, what does that mean? Anyway, I'm not trying to be cute with you, William. I mean, but it's just like it's one of those things you really want to think through, and in various ways. Don't limit yourself to something like that. Someone defined, this is William going on, someone defined and taught the elements and principles of design, rules of thirds, use odd numbers, etc. What's the difference? Again, all those things that you're looking at there are related to the idea of getting variety in a picture. So how you get it is up to you. And making things boringly the same is that your rule? That's a rule. You could do that all day long, but how long will people buy your work? When you stop being interesting, when you start getting predictable. But odd numbers, I always talk about odd numbers in the sense that there's when you have two of something, there is something, but when you have three, you have what would equivalent, you have space between them, size differences between them. All of a sudden you have a movement. And movements are useful things in terms of making a painting interesting. The distances between similar things, the movement from a big red to a medium-sized red to a little red, and the timing between them and all those things are really there. One of the things I would say to you all about composition is just the world of the rectangle is what it is. It's all kinds of stuff. It's just whatever you see in the world out there and you find interesting, but it can be made out of everything. There's no limit. Red, yellow, and blue, I use that expression using a variety of three. I find it less interesting to use two colors. It's more interesting to use three. That's the rule of threes, if you want to call it that. But interesting is the fundamental underlying thing. And I don't know of a rule beyond that, And I've said before when I'm talking about this, people talk about avoiding twos. I've seen Degas has done a painting in which he uses twos 3 times. He does two. Look at the painting in Boston of the. Is that the one? I think it's the one with the woman in the carriage. And I've used that before on one of these videos, so you might dig around looking for that one. But he uses 2 or 3 times, so there's no rule about twos in a broad sense of that word. But equality is a thing where, sort of to be avoided because it's less interesting than having two things slightly different from each other. That's why I said side by side, equal distances from the frame is not interesting. Having one closer to the frame, having them both different sizes and different size from the frame and all that sort of stuff. Those things are, and so so I would say find your own rules, make your painting interesting. But I don't know of any books that actually give me what I would call a really good rule. Equilibrium is a real thing in a painting. For some reason, if a painting feels like it's, it's going to tip over, it looks like the frame is been put on wrong and somebody chopped the painting off. I mean, things like that really do appear. So there is a thing about getting some balance on that. What is that? That is one of those classes of things, though, that you could say, well, is that a rule? So that need for stability in the rectangle, I just don't know if it's any more of a rule. In a sense, maybe it's a rule in the same sense as you have to have a beginning, a middle, and end of a story. It has to all cohere, Maybe that's what that is, but that's a reasonable one to think about. The idea of how it all hangs together in a way that doesn't make you feel like it ought to be fixed somewhere. I like when Degas said that this painting is such that it looked like if you moved anything in it, the stability, the organization of it was such that if you moved anything, it would disturb the painting. It wouldn't work. And he must have stood there and tried to move some things, but that's just as saying that things as they were playing set up that field of interest and equilibrium in such a way that in that moment the painting worked well. You could change something, but you'd have to immediately add something else probably to get it if you throw it out of balance in that way. But balance, is that a rule? I would say in the sense of those rules that underlie, that sit below the rule of interesting, that would be the nearest thing. that one, and what else? But there is that in a rectangle. So consider what the rectangle is telling you. Remember, it's something in a frame. It's what happens inside here. And there's got to be some level and is this a rule? There's got to be some level at which people are comfortable with it. I've mentioned that the near touching things and what are they, touching on the edge of the frame? There are things like that are uncomfortable for the viewer. We've learned that. So am I going to write that as a rule? Yeah. So I might, but it's still in the class of things to avoid, right? Because you're going to make the viewer uncomfortable. Shock your grandmother is a thing, and the rule of thumb was don't make pictures that are offensive to people. What is that rule? What's that a rule about? What is that, composition? Or is it just a rule about not making people uncomfortable? Or, and if it's elevating, I mean, I would say we have an obligation in painting to do good things for our neighbor. So what we make, it should be logical. I'm saying that's unity. It should be fun, and if to whatever extent it has a narrative, it should be uplifting, right? I find the music is always uplifting in a sense when it's actually beautiful to appear. I'm just talking now about the appearances of what happens in the rectangle, the color scheme, for example. A bad color scheme, what's that? But what's the rule I'm going to write to you about the color scheme? You have to use your own eyes. It has a function of having variety. It has a function of having unity in the same exact way. So that's what I say about that. Likely the teachers used words and movement lines as in arabesque to define why good composition works. Now, I have used that, and maybe you've seen that, William. I do talk about the main line of a composition. That's just, if a rectangle is made out of three basic things, spots of value, linearities, that is, say, things that move in relation to each other, or lines in the sense of having curve or having straight, all those are the content of the visual impression. And so once there's a main line, like a dominant spot, everything else has to pay attention to that for unity to exist. So in the same way, a main line, and so you'll have counterlines, you'll have lines that play off of that main line because they must, for the sake of unity. But to do it with ultimate interesting, that's one of the things I like to say about Bob Hunter, is that he makes pyramid after pyramid after pyramid after pyramid. How come it doesn't get boring? And if you don't look at it more than superficially, it is boring in a sense. I don't know how he could have not been bored in one sense, but why not do asymmetrical pictures and make that a thing? But he had a reason, a financial reason. He said to not do that. He wanted his pictures to go over couches, and if they were symmetrical, they'd go over the couch. But if they were not symmetrical, they'd be off on the sides somewhere. Right? Thought. What he said. So use words and movement lines to describe why good composition works. That's okay, but learn the rules, decide when to break them. I don't know that any of this stuff is about rules. It's about stuff that happens and better ways to use them. Stuff visually, stuff that happens in a painting. So, that people put a rule out there, like in the storytelling part, where you want to pick when you're doing an illustration. You want to choose, if a guy's about to be skewered, you want to choose that moment when he's just about to be skewered, not having been skewered. There are things like that. Those are like rules too, but I think they've all been broken. It's not like they mean anything in that limited sense. Unity and variety aren't in that class. That means something. You won't find a great work that doesn't have those. So, and that I'm talking about composition, but I'm also probably to some degree talking about the story. It's less so. So isn't it all about awareness for new artists like me? I don't think you should be unaware. You have to have heard what people said. I heard about the road in. I heard about this and that. There's nothing wrong with being aware of that. You should be aware of those things. That doesn't mean there are rules that I would tell you need to learn these. I don't know rules like that. But in the course of, and for example, when you heard Tom Dunley say when we were being critiqued by Gamble in our compositions, he didn't say about this rule and that rule. He did talk about the noble half of a painting. That's a reality, the upper portion of the picture. If you put a person way down low in the picture, it looks more ignoble than if you put their head up high, as a portrait, say. So there are things that happen like that in the painting. What's the rule? Do we make paintings that want to make people look bad? But on the other hand, there are plenty of paintings, even portraits, where people are down low in the picture, and it doesn't do that to them. So what is the noble half of the painting, So those are all pretty cool things, So I like your last bit here, William. I like painting blues musicians. I have a choice of positioning the area of interest, the angle of their guitar, their mic or arm. Sure, will I consider DS as well as other dynamic symmetry as well as other compositional elements? I look at watercolor. That's one of the things I want you to be aware of when you talk about dynamic symmetry. I started saying that before, I think. I've seen way too many paintings made but with a use of dynamic symmetry as if it was some panacea, some amazing thing that would get you the good composition. But I've seen way too many really bad compositions where they have this grid they're living on and stuff like that. And that's what I'm saying. There's nothing I'm not going to ever be that guy that's going to tell you that. I don't even find it interesting to read about. And I've read plenty about it. I mean, following the ideas of Leonardo back in the day and what they claimed about, and nobody claims with authority about several of his paintings. And then some of them, they say they don't have dynamic symmetry. I can find those proportions in any picture you give me. So I don't know why that would be considered a benefit. So I would recommend, forget it. That's not what you need to learn to do. You need to just organize this stuff in the rectangle. So it looks great and tells your story or whatever. Okay. All right. And it hangs together. Unified, interesting, tells your story, whatever. I look at watercolor compositions and try to figure out why these paintings were selected or won. Well, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, providing you have top composers. If you're trying to judge that, I found that the guys that were judging often weren't very good painters, and that's not unusual in competition. So, that's not something I would base anything on, why they were selected. Are you assuming mastery all around you? These aren't those days. And by the way, there is another thing that's been said, that most painters judging a jury pick the people that are like them, that think like them. So what is that? As Gamble said, composition is very personal. But I found that over and over. I used to win regularly because I would go and see who the jury was. And if they worked in my direction, I would get into the show and get picked. Such a joke. I didn't even want to do it anymore. Which rules did they follow? That I'm aware of and not. I like also local galleries and amateur shows and see painting that don't entertain me and try to figure out why not. That's a really good thing. There's two elements of study in front of you, two things to study. One is paintings that work and one is paintings that don't work. I'm a big fan of studying the paintings of really good painters, including the ones that don't work. But I learned a lot by trying to say, what would I do? And when you say don't work, who are you to even say don't work? I like that because it means that you don't have to know rules to know it doesn't work. And that's your whole structure for designing a rectangle. That ain't it. That ain't it. That ain't it. You just keep saying it over and over as your trial and error stuff. That ain't interesting would be a good one. That ain't unified is another one, But, however you're doing it. But if you start writing rules and whose shoulder are you looking over or who's looking over your shoulder to see which rule you obeyed to get that. Yeah. So that is, but I do say, figure out why not. It's harder, in fact, in some ways, it's harder to figure out why paintings work when you're young than to figure out why they don't work. But anytime you see something, you wonder about it, I just stand there and hold my thumb up and cover a section of the painting and try to see it without that, try to imagine it without that. Or try to put my thumb over it and imagine it with a different color or a different size or whatever, and watch what it does. And you can do that, of course, these days. You can just print out something and and do it literally. You know, if you print it out on a piece of paper and shellac the paper, you can then put paint on it and make changes. I did that with a Paxton. I reversed the figures in the Paxton in a Paxton. It's the 2-figure painting, nude. And the owner, if I'm not mistaken, the owner was the owner of that picture bought my pastel, was a pastel version of it. I think eventually not discarded, but sold the other one. So I'm not telling you what's better. I'm just laughing about it. So William, that's sort of the bigger way I think about it. I don't think you should. I think you just got to do what you got to do, but stay within yourself. You know, use your own judgment. You know, if you're a painter, it's because you saw things that gave you satisfaction, gratification, joy, and the composition is a huge piece of that. And I used to recommend to people that they collect postcards of their favorite compositions. Get a collection of like 20, and then keep collecting and bring the new one into the collection and see which one you can get rid of, and see if you can improve your taste in composition even. Because we don't know anything. Everything's good. Wine's wonderful, right? Oh, good wine. Every wine is good. And by the time you've really tasted the varieties that are out there and the kinds of things that flavors do and things like that, you become a wine connoisseur, right? So you need to taste them. And in the case of painting, it's just about looking. And I'm not saying these postcards will give you the perfect thing to look at, but it's not bad. And if you can find pictures that aren't so wholly distorted, you know, I mean, every time I do one of these shows, I'm frustrated by wanting to say, but it isn't that color probably, but it probably isn't that color. But anyway, let's keep talking. But it is better than nothing, though. And composition isn't one of those things in that classes. If you just talked about color composition, you could do the same thing in any kind of aspect of it. But if you understand that the 3 basic elements, once you go visual, are that there are spots in pictures. There's a distribution of those events. They make for what Gamble used to like to call patterning as part of that. There are color schemes, and the whole distribution is a big deal, right? What happens in the rectangle? Well, things repeat. Light effects, light spots in a dark picture, they repeat. They change sizes. They're very interesting. I recommend people, by the way, look at the Greek vase because of how the best ones is take the circular ones, but the best ones that really are intriguing are you look at them closely and you'll see that all there are is patterns, but the dark and light patterns don't repeat each other in size. There's this. They seem to have bought into the idea, much more than the gold mean. They bought into the idea of variety in the sizes of the spots and the shapes of the spots. So, but that's the larger game. So probably I should stop at that. Oh, I was going to say there are 3 parts. So there's the color scheme, the values distribution thing, which also has a line element to it, and then there's actually line stuff, like the side of a house is a vertical, and so you'd see that what that is in terms of other things linearly, as well as the lineup of things that go up. So you see a main line of a composition could be an S-curve. Those things are happening in a picture. There's a unity to that, so that the line, the mass, and the values and the color, each of those things has to be interesting and varied. So, and there's so many more classes of things like that, like edges, the variety of edges. So yeah, I don't know how else I can say it, but I'm just doing that to give you a sense of why I don't want to be judged as being this negative guy about any of these things, except people are constantly looking for formulas for something that'll sort of get rid of your problems in your painting. And the only thing that'll do that is your own eyes over time, you know, and learning how to move around spots and, you know, all the rest. So, and, but if you already know, let's leave it at that. The bottom line is if you already know beautiful paintings when you see them and you have a whole list of things you just love. If you love them for any reason besides the story, you're in my world, and you must have there's some awareness. It gave you joy. And in that thing, in that composition, it's the stuff that in some sense you're already invested in. It's already in you. It's like hearing music. Nobody has to tell you what music's all about or give you a formula for the music for you to say, this is good music. So when you play sounds then after that, if you're a composer, you should be able to make good music, right? What rule? No rule. No rule. Okay. Good. Good. I'll probably get some noise from that one. But thank you, William W., very much for participating in the questioning, the quizzing, the challenging. I like it. Hope you do well. I hope your career goes well. All right, take care. And thank you all for the usual subscribing, sharing, donating, and your comments. Keep them coming, please. Much appreciated. All right. Till next time. All right. See you later.